Really appreciate it. Really interesting content and topic. I see a lot of questions coming in on the chat function. So if the participants want to keep sending those in, I see a couple of questions asking if a slide or video recording is available, and I believe so. I believe all the modules have been recorded and will be available afterwards, as well as the slides too. Yeah, some really great content there today, and a question I might pose to kick things off to Barry would be in your presentation you spoke a little bit about the fact that the 10-minute observation phase has kind of been taken away from the NFPA 285. What was the thinking behind that, or what was the driving force for that?
To eliminate it? Because it didn't serve any purpose. There was no pass-fail criteria. There was no requirement for documenting anything that happened beyond that. I asked Just Vital about it years ago, why it existed, and his response to me is that it was a compromise when they were developing the standard to get one individual to withdraw his negative vote if they would put a mandatory 10-minute post observation period in. Of course, that's hearsay. I wasn't there. I wasn't firsthand witness to it. That's as Just Vital explained it to me. So.
Yeah. The politics, as always.
Yes. But it really served no purpose. I mean, there was no pass-fail criteria and no recording requirement.
Yeah, for sure. Then just looking at a couple of the questions that came in regarding our friend Abhishek and Dr. Suis were questioning the testing requirements for EFIS panels. Are they the same as the sandwich panels, the ACMs, or where does the difference come in there?
Well, with regard to 285, we're just looking at combustible components. And so there wouldn't be a difference in how they're tested in 285 unless you get into the joint issues and some of the finer details there. As far as the product standards, I mean, I'm not sure of one that's specific for a sandwich panel generally. I mean, we have metal insulated panels, which are polyurethane core and metal skins. And then we have other skins such as OSB board as a sandwich panel. So I'm not sure of how in depth we can get into the differences into that. Each standard has its own set of requirements. So. Yeah. But as far as 285 goes, it doesn't differentiate. If it's got a combustible component, then that's where the trigger comes in through the code requirements. Yeah.
That's interesting. Just going through the questions here that I've taken out. Dr. Suis, you've asked if the testing 28414/2 is available in the UAE. From my understanding, it is. I think there's 2 facilities that can carry out that test. Todd asked very early on, and Barry or Beth might be able to answer, does ASTM E136 still define combustibility within the NFPA 285?
Yes, it does. The other standards were added, but E136 is still the primary.
Yeah. Okay. Mostafa, you spoke a bit about obviously the need and requirement for testing and certification, something near and dear to my heart, of course. From the UK, in the UK, is product certification required for all facade systems, or is it just testing?
I'll have to be honest here. Following the incident that we had previously, the requirement were submitting the fire test data as a part of the construction. However, following the review and the comment which has been made and the document about the fire safety, it reflected the fact that you need more systematic review of the products. You cannot just rely on a test which has been done 10 years ago and suddenly it could be used for current construction. As such, more and more manufacturer would be asked for this certification and the products and their compliance. So if you're asking if it is a regulation at the moment, just asking, definitely you need to have a certification. For some of the products, no, but from more and more it became apparent that the local authorities are asking for those kind of assurance that the product which are going to go on site, they've been tested, how it's been tested, what was the detail, and they would ask for those level of information.
Yeah. Obviously, something you see a lot here in the Middle East, and you may have come across it obviously with your work for Warrington, is the use of EJs or engineering judgments. And I think to everyone in the business, it can be a bad term or a taboo term, because it's so varied in terms of what an EJ is. With the scope of BS 9414, obviously put some framework on, what can be carried out. Ultimately, where does the buck stop there in terms of carrying out that assessment work? Is that only going to come from labs and certification bodies?
A couple of things. I think I totally understand the question. I mean, what you were concerned, and well, as you can see for the document that we prepared for BS, if I just want to focus on BS 841 for extended application for 9414, we've tried to limit it massively to whatever has been tested, unless you would do a range of testing. So your judgment, which is going to be done by a lab or someone qualified in the term, who knows products are going to perform, how systems performance is different to product performance when you are putting them as a system on, then you would have two systems to make a judgment rather than having one time off test. So it's basically, it became quite a limited approach, I would say, but you would need a range of tests before you could make such a judgment. Yeah.
No, that's fair enough. And then, in line with or in light of BS 9414, and if we look to our North American colleagues, do we see a potential for the future of NFPA 285 to include an addendum or an addition that would allow that kind of assessment?
Well, that's what's being added with this next revision. Right.
Okey-doke. Then I'm just digging through the questions here as best as I can. Todd actually brought up an interesting point there, that there are state jurisdictions in the US that don't require the NFPA 285, provided that the building is sprinklered or the property line is set back at a larger amount. What are your thoughts on those allowances and those exceptions?
Actually, this is Beth. There's allowances for fire separation distance and things like that, but that is actually unrelated to the exterior cladding requirements that they would still need to meet, I believe. So that's a separate issue, I believe. So that's the tricky thing about the U.S., though. We have 50 states, which also have many jurisdictions, and depending on how the states adopt the codes, there could be hundreds in one state, or states like California, Massachusetts have a single code. But I do believe from the basic construct of the code, that would be a different issue. Hopefully they're looking at it that way.
To add to that, most of the codes are adopted at the municipal level, at the city level, not the state level. And I'm not aware of any city that has an exemption for 285, whether the building sprinkle or any other requirements. I think that would be a huge mistake, and I think that all the building officials recognize that.
Yeah. Okay. Our friend Bobby in Ireland has an interesting question, and it's something I suppose that we've come across a lot here in the UAE. After the amount of cladding fires we've had, and I suppose it's more of an opinion rather than maybe an official line. But obviously, when you're talking about the facade build-up, there are lots of manufacturers feeding in to create the end product. You've got your panel manufacturer, you've got your frame manufacturers, you've got the fire-stopping manufacturers all coming together. And in the UAE, that question was asked: well, who's ultimately responsible for large-scale fire testing? How would you come across that question, or how do you feel about that? Do you think that the industry needs to become kind of harmonized and put it back on the manufacturers to say, well, we don't care who does it, but it needs to be done? Or do we need to legislate or, come up with a clear directive?
Well, this is Mostafa, and as you said, it's point of view rather than legislation.
Of course.
When it comes to facade, you're talking about the system, you're not talking about a specific product. So, for instance, if you have a manufacturer who prepares the cladding on their own, and they have an insulation manufacturer who provides the insulation, and they have a cavity barrier manufacturer who comes with the fixation of the cavity barrier, all of them the critical elements of the system when you are testing them. For instance, if something goes wrong with the fixation of the cavity barriers, your system could easily get bypassed by the fire inside the cavity. Or if your cladding becomes unstable during the fire, then that would allow this, quick passage of the flame. So from my point of view, this is a system test, it's not a simple product test. Otherwise, we would have relied on reaction to fire performance of the material, which I believe this is not going to be a very accurate evaluation of the overall performance of a cladding system.
Yeah. Okay.
From a stateside perspective on that question, we see a lot of times manufacturers partner together. There's usually one primary lead. And then this is also where the engineering judgments come into play a lot, because you could have a spray foam manufacturer sponsor a test with a particular cladding, but they don't want to be locked into just that one specific cladding. And so then we get into different engineering evaluations and how they can get other variables within it. When they are, partnered with a cladding manufacturer for a test, then obviously that cladding manufacturer is not going to want to have other claddings listed or called out with it.
Yeah. No, and I think those are some interesting points of view for sure. And I think it's one of those questions that I don't think we're in a position to answer it or give a definitive answer on it. Just kind of cleaning up some of the questions here. Ali asked earlier, are these in line with UAE fire and life safety codes? Ali, I assume you mean NFPA 285 and BS 8414, and yet those standards are part of the UAE fire and life safety code. Leonardo has a question, and I believe it was towards yourself, Beth. Is the greater than 12 meters, is that the measurement from the ground level, or exceeding 12 meters regardless of height? So.
The 12 meters for high rise. Yeah. Oh no, yeah. That is. I believe that's the height, from grade plane, because we measure the high rise provisions. We measure the distance from the fire service access to the occupied floor, but I believe this is just the height from grade plane.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. I think that's the questions I can see. Philip, if you're there, if you've seen any other questions that need answering.
So thanks, Ed. I think you addressed all the previous questions. I see a late question coming in there from William. I don't know if you guys want to address any more. I realize we've gone a little bit over time, but we did have a small delay due to technical issues. So if the audience is interested and you're willing to stay on longer, you could take that as well.
Yeah, I see William's question there, and obviously it's a UAE-centric question in terms of civil defence approvals. Yeah, William, I'd like to be able to say there's probably a black or white answer, but there isn't. Your best form is to communicate directly with civil defence and see what their requirements are, because unfortunately they're a living, breathing organisation, and they do change their minds with certain issues as they get more information. So it's best to speak directly with them rather than us second guess them. Okay.
Great.
I think that's it.
Yeah, then with this, I think I would like to thank you, Ed, and the speakers for joining in now from all the way from the US and the UK. A fantastic session. I'd like to thank the audience for tuning in. We've had great attendance now from across the globe. It's really been a global experience, I can say. I'd like to leave you with a quick note. So from our side, we're going to share the recording of the event with attendees. We will also share the certificate of attendance for your records and development. I'd like to mention that there is a LinkedIn group called Safety Design in Buildings, in which most of the presenters and participants play a role. You can use that, and I encourage you to join it. There's also a related webpage, LinkedIn webpage called Safety Design in Buildings, and I think I can show you a button for that in case somebody would like to go into it. Just see a So that's the quick LinkedIn information if you'd like to stay tuned. With this, I thank you all, and we're ending the recording here, and I wish you a great rest of the day.
Thanks very much, Philip.
Thank you.
Philip. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye.